Hello everybody, I'm Alexey Kraborov, the organizer of SF Scala. Here we are on location at FONA, and we just had a panel on infrastructure after Twitter, and we have Mark McBride from Turbine.
Hello.
What is your current title?
I'm currently CEO and co-founder of Turbine Labs.
And what is Turbine Labs?
So Turbine Labs is a product that helps you balance the tension between iterating your infrastructure quickly and maintaining a stable customer experience. So we built a reverse proxy and a modern management plane to allow you to do a lot of sort of modern release practices, testing in production, blue-green deploys, canaries, et cetera, in a way that's seamless and fits into whatever stack you have.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed there were several kind of infrastructure, startup as a service startups. There was Skyliner and there was GrantWorks. And I think people want, from different angles, they want to give you essentially the whole startup infrastructure. And so I think the idea is that developers will just push stuff to GitHub and it will magically happen. So what is kind of your specific take on this space?
Sure. So I think Skyliner is great. We followed their trajectory pretty closely, and I think they're really good at getting you from like a raw GitHub repository to something deployed in production as a V1. And I think they're offering a lot of just ops out of the box, best practices honed at Stripe and Yammer and other places. What we're looking at is really for people who already have a V1 out in production. When they reach the end of the natural life of that architecture, how do they move to what's next? And so, microservices are a big thing now. A lot of people are looking to move from what they have to Kubernetes or to Mesos, but none of those companies really have a story for how you move from what you have today into that system. And so by putting the proxy as an indirection layer between your customers and their experience and your infrastructure, you allow yourself more flexibility to switch that up. So, talking over with some of the Skyliner folks, theirs is kind of get you to V1. Ours is get you from V1 to V2.
Interesting. I wonder, can these things be combined?
I think right now Skyliner's opinionated enough it would be difficult and doesn't fit like seamlessly into their stack because they're using Docker as a unit of deploy. But I believe they're fairly opinionated with the sort of ancillary stuff they do around EC2 to get a nice stable, or AWS, a nice stable operational platform. I think in the future there's things we can do that probably work complementarily. In a complementary fashion with them. But right now, like our focus is people who are kind of later in life, engineering-wise, than Skyliner is.
And how is it different from what Buoyant is doing?
So Buoyant is really focusing on RPC and making those deep service stacks work effectively. And at Twitter, that was a huge deal. As I think William and the Buoyant literature shows, like once you have a chain where there's 10 RPC calls, failures on that become much, much more likely. Timeouts are harder to manage, deadlines are harder to manage, circuit breakers, retries, that's all really difficult. We're focused more at the edge and allowing you to mutate infrastructure, modulate, the deployment topology of your application in a way that's flexible and is really low risk to customers. And so while they're dealing more with kind of this core, fairly complicated service topology and helping you manage that effectively, which is still very important, we're focused more at the edge in managing that customer experience more effectively. And so this is kind of similar to saying like how does Buoyant compare to Cloudflare? Like those are very different things at very different parts of the network stack. And I think we fit in between those two things. Okay.
So it makes me super curious to see like an example, right?
Sure.
So maybe you can come and give us a talk and show us maybe.
Yeah, would love to.
A fuller example. But
love to.
I wonder, right? So you were basically leading the build team at Twitter, and obviously it's all very idiomatic, and so usually release cycle is very idiomatic, tied to the culture of a company. You kind of want to productize best practices. Right. So I wonder, how do you see that, work in the real world where everybody has opinions, it has already some kind of release process and entrenched kind of the habits of their own?
So I think there's been a lot of work put into CI/CD recently. If you look at like Jenkins was a fairly novel thing 5 years ago, and now there's a bunch of Jenkins clones and people have pushed more from CI to CD. I think the question we asked was, what does the D and CD mean? People have deploy or delivery or what have you. But even there, it's like a really sort of fuzzy notion. Is that meaning I push an image to Docker Hub? Does it mean I actually deploy a thing onto infrastructure? Does it mean I deploy and it's visible to customers? We're really hoping that people sort of separate deploy from release. Getting something running on compute, automate the hell out of that. And I think that can be fairly isolated right now with things like namespaces and Kubernetes. What's harder for people to do, or riskier for people to do, is that step of releasing new code to customers. And that's something where if you release something that's faulty, that customer's impacted and you're going to get called, and that's bad.
Yes.
And so to the extent that you can observe the differences in old code and new code, so with our releases, you deploy just a trickle of customers to new code. You can compare the difference in experience between those two versions of code. Is this one slower? Is it throwing errors more? Does it have a different behavior than the one that you had deployed before? And then if you're separating deploy from release and using routing as your release mechanism, if you notice it's bad, fixing that becomes a fairly trivial step of just, we won't route to that new version anymore. So to the extent that you can make that sort of less risky by releasing it to fewer customers, quick detection of faults because you can observe old versus new system, and quick reversion if you do notice a fault, those releases become less risky, and you can get true sort of, the dream is I check into Git and it goes to customers if it's good. Like that's, everything else is sort
and
of...
you have good defined as a policy, basically.
Right. Everything else is sort of attacks in between. And I think we're in pretty good shape there. I think a strict deploy-based approach is going to be sort of problematic to get working right. And treating that, getting it running on compute versus managing the release to customers is a good separation, and something we're working on making better.
Nice. So I really like it. I wish like in my previous companies I could have something like this. So how easy is it to plug into existing companies?
Sure. So most people already have something like this in place. It's just crude right now.
They have Jenkins of some sort and like some
So
deployment
Jenkins, they have a deployment tool. They also probably have a load balancer or reverse proxy they're using now. So Amazon has ELBs. They just released ALB, which is a more sophisticated version of ELB. And so we see ourselves as a better back half of the ELB. So when we go in for a deploy, it's like still use your ELB to be that armor sort of on the edge, protecting your infrastructure from scary internet traffic. But have this companion that's a software-based, more flexible routing engine that sits right behind it to really direct customer traffic to the right places. And if you have that in the right management plane, it's a point to observe customer experience, it's a point to affect control, and it's also a place to keep a record of all the changes made to customer experience. And so that's sort of where we slot in. It's not that we're adding a whole new piece of infrastructure, we're really just adding sort of an extra superpower to a piece of infrastructure you already have.
Okay. So this is all super exciting. I can't wait to see you guys present all this at one of our meetups.
All right.
Maybe like giving us kind of a live demo.
Sure.
And that will be really cool because I think a lot of people can actually use it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Cool, and it's great to have you back in the community. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And we're neighbors, I'm going to visit you guys in Alameda.
Nice. All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much.